Welcome to this, the fifth of our series of 8 webinars, looking at the challenges and opportunities afforded to us by digital or online ministry, an area of ministry which has shot to prominence in recent months as churches have had to rapidly reimagine their function and purpose. Each of these 8 webinars look at a different aspect of digital ministry, and you can find details of each of them along with a link to book yourself in on the St. Padarn's website. You'll find the link posted to the chat box as I speak. Just before I introduce Chris Dearden, our speaker today, a quick explanation of the format this afternoon to help things run as smoothly as possible. Chris will speak first of all for up to a maximum of 45 minutes, after which we have set aside a maximum of 30 minutes for questions and answers and possibly some further discussion. The timings of each may vary, and we may not use our full-time allocation, but however it pans out, our cut-off time will be no later than 12:15. If you'd like to ask a question at any time, you can submit these via the Q&A function, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. We won't interrupt Chris's presentation, but my colleagues, Veronica and Jen, who are working hard in the background today, will monitor these as we go along, and we'll use these as a basis for the Q&As at the end. If we have a few questions broadly asking the same thing, we'll probably just use one of them, so please don't be offended if you find your question is dismissed for any reason. Don't worry if you missed something or you want to hear it again, as this webinar will be recorded and you can revisit it at any time via the Ministerial Hub on the St. Padarn's website. Finally, you will automatically receive a feedback request via email in the next couple of days. It's very short and straightforward, but we're learning as we go along with these webinars, so it'd be really useful to know if we've got it right or where we can do things better. So, notice is done. It's time to introduce today's speaker, who is Chris Dearden. Chris is Church Warden of St. Paul's Church in Llandudno, the first of our churches to live stream services way back in 2016. If his name seems particularly familiar to you, that's probably because of his day job as a news reporter for BBC Cymru Wales, covering Anglesey, Conwy and Gwynedd. So he knows a thing or two about how to broadcast and engage an audience. And today he's going to offer us some practical tips and advice based on his vast experience. And so it's my great joy to welcome you, Chris, and we're very grateful that you have found time to be with us today.
Thank you very much indeed. What I want to do over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I've got a clock in the corner of my eye, so we'll try and keep the timings as tight as we can, is to take you on a bit of journey, if you like. So let's start that by, hopefully, sharing this with you. This is a picture which has appeared quite a lot over the last few months. It is one we took, I think, on the first day that we started live streaming services from St. Paul's in Llandudno. It was mainly done for sort of demonstration purposes. Things have moved on a little bit since then, and one of the most obvious things that you might be able to work out from this screen is that the phone's actually the wrong way round, of course, because most television and live streaming on Facebook is actually done that way in landscape format. So this phone is actually the wrong way around for the purposes of the camera. So what I'm going to do is to take you on a journey, if you like, as to where we've been in the last 4.5 years at St. Paul's. Not just from the point of view of showing off, if you like, anything, but actually I want to try and be fairly candid about the experiences that we've had along the way, the things which have gone well, the things which haven't gone so well, the lessons we've learned, and where we've evolved to, if you like, over time. What I can say, though, is that we started back in 2016, and the reason for live streaming our services back then was mainly because a number of us in the choir were looking for basically ways that we could spread the word about St. Paul's. We were using Facebook as a social medium relatively well. We'd recruited a few people for the choir that way. And I got talking to a work contact at North Wales Tourism, who was talking about how this new thing called Facebook Live could be used to promote tourism businesses. And the sort of two ideas came together. This idea of, well, we had some content, as they call it. We had a service that we could just put live, so we didn't have to create anything. And actually, we could potentially use this as a way of spreading the word about what we did in church. It actually worked relatively well in the sense that because we were one of the few churches doing it at the time, then it soon attracted the attention not just of our congregation and a few others in the community beyond, but of the media as well. This is what I'm hoping, as I can move on. Just bear with me. Give me 2 ticks, because what I'm going to do is to move to there and back to there. So, right. There we go. Right. This was, yeah, the TV cameras came our way to talk about what we do when we're live streaming.
You often hear how the number of people attending churches here in Wales has been declining over the years. Well, St Paul's in Llandudno is trying to combat that by live streaming its Sunday morning service on social media to try to attract a wider audience. Rob Shelley went along to see the reality behind the virtual.
From the outside, St Paul's Church in Llandudno all looks very substantial, not to mention the Norman arches and the marble pillars. But it also lives in a complete abstract of virtual cloud. Welcome to Wales's first digital church, streaming its Sunday morning services live on social media. You are the digital pioneers.
Well, apparently so. I mean, the idea came from the choir. I thought, well, it's possible we can do it, and we didn't realise how simple it was. It's basically a smartphone, and it's switched on, and it records the service.
All you need is a mobile phone, a tripod, a vicar, some hymns and a congregation, and then the outside world can come in to the shelter of St Paul's.
We discovered that if we put all the people together who were watching us on Facebook and all the people who were coming here to the actual service, we wouldn't be able to fit everybody in the church, which is just fantastic.
It's a good job you've got a virtual church, isn't
yes.
it? So on Sundays, the choir doesn't just echo around the North Conway coastline. Without having to sing any louder, they've been heard by online visitors all over the world. It's important that people sort of have that feeling of being included, even if they're watching it digitally.
We've got people that have been watching from afar, to be out of the country, you know, and they've heard a hymn, and they said, "Oh, that takes me right back."
Not to mention people who, because of distance or illness or just lack of opportunity, can't physically make it to church.
Our daughter was visiting last weekend. She had a train to catch, but she was able to watch me doing my bit in church from up the road.
So you're a virtual lay reader.
I'm a virtual lay reader as well.
They've attracted 600 viewers from as far as Burma and as close as 2 streets away. One day, maybe they'll put up a plaque. Wales's Digital Sunday started here. Rob Shelley, ITV News, Llandudno.
There we go. I should say just quickly, following that was an extract from the ITV Wales Evening News on January the 5th, 2017. We're showing it using the exemption from copyright for non-commercial research, taking into account St Padarn's status as a recognised academic institution. You can probably get some insight as to why I'm saying that and what I'm saying in the copyright webinar later on in the series. Going back to that video clip, though, I didn't particularly just show it to show off, if you like, but also because it gives some insight as to what we were doing and how we were doing it at the time, and the sort of context, if you like, the feedback, the responses we got, and the like to live streaming. It was something which, for a long time, that was basically all we did, pretty much until lockdown. We didn't really develop our sort of format at all once we got it up and running. But it's probably worth just talking through what we actually did, because I've divided the basics of, I suppose, of getting a church service to live stream into 5Ps, which the first is practicalities, which I suppose basically just means kit. The most obvious one is, as you could probably gather from the ITV Wales report you saw there, is probably a mobile phone to do it on. You don't have to do it on a mobile phone, but it's the easiest way, if you like, of doing that. I'm just going to unshare the screen at this point and bring myself back into full vision, because as we have a mobile phone, fine. The other two importance is basically to hold the camera steady, simply because otherwise somebody gets sort of an awful lot of sort of tired arms holding it up. To do that, we invested in a tripod. This one is rubbish, and we're still using it on occasions, because when you extend it out fully, it wobbles horribly, but never mind, it does keep the camera steady as long as you don't knock it too much. You'll see the result of that tripod not being the world's best in just a moment, actually. The other thing you do need is a clip like this to basically hold a mobile phone. This has springiness, if you like, and it goes around the mobile phone. There we go, I'm showing that like so. I don't think I'd make it as a presenter on QVC where you have to demonstrate things and talk at the same time. But there we go. In extremis, I have actually dispensed with the tripod when I left it behind one day and the clip, and balanced the phone on a music stand. That came to me as a piece of inspiration one day as a good substitute if you haven't got a tripod to hand. But I then had to try and peer through the sort of lattice of the music stand to see where the controls on the phone were. It worked, but there we are. The other thing, of course, you need is some way of getting online, which either means that you have to have a church with Wi-Fi, or you basically have to use some of the bandwidth, the data allowance on the phone of the person whose phone it is. It does use a certain amount of data. We'll come back to that in a second, actually, because there's a few things I want to say there. Also mentioned, let me just go back to live. To the presentation now. There we go. Also mentioned people. I mentioned people actually because we found it was very useful at St Paul's to have someone physically operating the camera. That was for two reasons. One, because you can't actually see the whole of our church from roughly the front pew in one camera shot. We could either have the pulpit and the altar and the chancel, or the lectern and the altar and the chancel, but never all 3-4 elements of the service. And what we basically found was that the only way we could do that was either to re-choreograph the service or basically have somebody to physically move the camera around. It also varied the shot a little bit. The thing which was also in the back of my mind as well was that if somebody's operating the camera, if there ever was an emergency of some form, they would have the ability to terminate the broadcast if someone collapsed in church, if we had to evacuate, that sort of thing, rather than just leaving the camera to its own devices. The irony of that is that somebody has collapsed in church. It was actually the person operating the camera, but there we go, and we were able to carry on around her as well, and all was fine. She's fine afterwards. One other thing to mention after people is privacy. We told the congregation what we were doing quite early on in this, because we did a few experiments at the start. We were worried though, and somebody did come back to us actually and raise a few privacy issues, just in the sense of if someone comes to church, I mean, British law is that if anyone's going to be on CCTV, there needs to be some way of telling them this. What we did in that was to actually consult with the Church of England, who were a little bit further ahead of us on live streaming and had a few protocols in place. And following their advice, what we did do was that, again, taking advantage of the fact that there was somebody operating the camera, we told anyone who didn't want to appear on camera that they should go to communion on, as you look eastwards, on the left-hand side, because the camera would be tilted towards the right during communion. For the rest of the service, as you'll see shortly, the congregation were actually behind the camera anyway, so it doesn't matter. The choir, because they're all performing anyway, seemed relatively unbothered about being on camera. Thankfully, there weren't any issues there that we could come up with. two more basics for you. A platform basically means what you're going to stream on. It is possible to put the live stream onto your own website. We shied away from doing that. We have got a website and we could have done it. It's slightly more technically complicated because of you need a bit more software to get yourself there. There's also the issue, if you like, that I rang up the copyright agencies, CCLI and PRS, and asked their opinion on this. And what they said was that so long as we had licenses in place as a church to perform the music, and which is the big sticking point, and to cover any copyright issues in church, then Facebook and YouTube were also covered as platforms, as media to stream the thing. And between the two of us, there would be enough licensing in place. You would then need, if you streamed on your own website, you need to have the license to put stuff out there that Facebook and YouTube and others have by their very existence. So we backed off a little bit from putting it on our own website and went for Facebook because that was the social medium we were using at the time. Since then, it is now possible to stream on YouTube. It's slightly more complicated because you can't do it from a mobile phone unless you have, I think, 100 subscribers. You can do it from a laptop, but that requires you to put a laptop in church. And we'll come to the more complicated ways of live streaming a bit later on. So when it comes to just getting ourselves out there, Facebook was the obvious one for us at the time back in 2016. Since we started, you can also now stream onto Instagram Live. However, from what I understand it, you're time limited there to I think it's just shy of an hour. I may be wrong, or 45 minutes. Suffice to say, it's short. It's shorter than the length of our service, so we've never actually bothered trying. Instagram isn't really set up as the place for sort of 45-minute videos, even if we could put them out there. So yes, in terms of the platform, we ended up on Facebook. We do nowadays take a recording of the service and put it on YouTube as well. And at some point, I'd like to try and look at live streaming on YouTube, but that's for the future. And then the final one is presentation, which is basically thinking about how you set the camera up, and it's little things like, I suppose, being careful. In our church is not too bad because the east end of the church isn't actually facing east. It's a quirk of the way that Llandudno was built. But if you have a church which faces due east or a little bit southeast, and you've got a morning service, there's a fair chance there'll be a lot of light coming through the east window if it's set up that way, and that's going to blast a lot of light into the lens of the camera. So there are considerations like that to bear in mind. And also the possibility, so just in terms of making it look good, there are ways that you can set up the shot, which I'll come to, I suppose, in the course of just giving you a chance to see what we did in the few years before lockdown. So if I move on to this, this is a service, or a tiny bit of a service, that we put out in February of 2019, so it's not that long ago, but this basically is what people would have seen had they logged in on Facebook that morning. If you know a bit of Anglican liturgy well enough, see if you can work out whereabouts we are in the service.
That by reason of the frailty of our nature, we cannot always stand upright. Grant to us such strength and protection as may support us in all dangers and carry us through all temptations. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Sit for our reading.
A reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 6.
There we go. I'll just pause that there. That's pretty much all we need to need to see of that. It was basically the end of the Gloria, the collect, and then the beginning of the first reading. You can see that there are some advantages there to having the person operating the camera, because we were able to pan around so that the person doing the reading is properly in shot. It's interesting, it throws up a few things about the way we do our services anyway, in the sense that it's reminded me I do need to have a word with certain people to say that they shouldn't really be walking up to the lectern during the Gloria, and it's fine if they leave a gap after the collect for reflection and just come up then. That, of course, is nothing to do with live streaming. That's down to the way that you run the service. It's also interesting that the person in question is, as you can possibly see, not tall enough to peek over the top of the eagle, which is an interesting one. We may need to look at those steps at some point, because they're not fantastic, and perhaps making the platform a little bit higher is in the order of the day. But as I say, those things in themselves are not necessarily within the remit of discussions about live streaming. There's a few things that I thought on looking back at that, which I'll just move on from. There we go. Can we do better? The answer is yes, we can. The one big thing that I was thinking when looking back at that short clip was that it's the sound quality. I mean, my sort of attention span was just starting to wane a little bit during the collect, and the collect isn't a long prayer at all, because the words are just a little bit faint, and it was like, what's going on? Because you can only really sort of pick up the sound that the microphone on the end of the phone is picking up. So if you look at this this shot here, for example, bottom corner of this screen, then it's all, you're at the mercy of what the microphone on the end of the phone can pick up. The other thing, whether I can go back, is certainly when we move to having the person at the eagle. I always like to try and set up the shot so that the person who's speaking, or the action, is roughly in the sort of rule of thirds zone. By that I mean when you're taking a still photograph or setting up a camera shot, is always in your eye. Just bear with me. I'll do this full screen. When your eye takes in a picture or a scene, your eyes spend all the time doing that around basically the middle sort of third zone of what you're looking at. So putting someone there and there in terms of their eyes draws you to them a little bit. It's a fairly small thing, but it's probably just worth sort of bearing in mind when we sort of set things like this up. Let's go back to the like so. So yeah, can we do better? The answer is yes, we can. Position of camera, just mentioned that. In terms of improving the sound quality, one thing I did when we moved into lockdown was I finally thought we needed to do something about the sound quality of what we were putting out, because of course our congregation were no longer in the building, and so I had the luxury, if you like, of being able to do things like in this picture you can see here, moving the camera ever so slightly closer to the celebrant. It's in a position where, to be honest with you, I'd probably be frowned upon if there was a congregation in the building, because it's basically on the top of the steps of the nave altar platform, and it's quite close to John, who's the priest there. That did enable us to get a slightly better sound quality because he was closer to it, and also to get a better picture quality because we could actually physically be closer. He just filled the screen a little bit more. And from that, I mean, also just mentioned setup of shot and angle of shot. I think I've been over those, if you like. It's how best to optimize things so that within the confines of you've got a phone on the top of a tripod, what best can you do to get the best results within the confines of what you've got. And from that, I'll move forward to during lockdown, we started doing daily evening prayer and streaming it from church. And what I was then able to do was to experiment, if you like, on myself, because I was the one saying the daily evening prayer, with putting into practice some of the things I've just been trying to talk you through. So this was the result anyway. O Lord, open thou our lips. Now, this is nothing different to, in terms of the actual kit, to what you saw in the clip just before. The difference being, if you like, that because I've been able to position the camera in such a way that I'm quite close to it, I'm in roughly the sort of third zone on the screen. The sound is much better because I'm closer to the camera. And for something like evening prayer, it's a lot easier because basically it's one person standing in one place. Then you can probably get a better result, if you like, out of just having a mobile phone on the top of a tripod. I think one of the things that I'm aware of is that there is always going to be a trade-off between the fact that in a communion service, things happen in different places. You've got people reading, you've got other contributions and the like. You may have a choir if we're in normal times at least. So it's trying to find a way of doing the best we can with the technology we've got. But moving on from there, next steps. There comes a point, as you can probably gather, that a mobile phone on top of a tripod will only get you so far. And so what we've been doing at St. Paul's over the last few weeks was basically to experiment, to look at other ways of doing things, other ways of getting ourselves live and on air. And I'll talk you through some of those. Just bear with me because I'm going to stop share like so. One easy thing that we did sort of experiment with is one of these. It's called an iRig, and it's basically a gadget which allows you to plug a microphone or a sound system or something similar. Can you see there's a where the input would go from the microphone or from the church sound system, and then plug that into a mobile phone. So here you have a phone, QVC moment again, like in there, like so. Those two are now an item, and it does have the small advantage of a little wheel on the side, which hopefully you can see there, which allows you to basically turn the volume. It's called the gain, but turn that up. It's a little bit more technically complicated than just the mobile phone, because with the mobile phone you plug it in and set it going. This does have you can possibly see that there's 3 positions on this, as off, which is fairly obvious, on, which sounds fairly obvious, but then something called plus 48. That's because some microphones have batteries in them to boost the signal that comes out of them, and some don't. And if your battery doesn't have if your microphone doesn't have a battery, then you can use the battery in this to boost the signal. And that's what the plus 48 is. I think it stands for 48 volts. This is where my technical knowledge starts to run out. So you can use that to plug yourself into the sound system in the church, or even just put a microphone up, or to link yourself to the priest's microphone or something similar. The other route that you can go down, which takes you, I suppose, into the next dimension, is one of these. Now, this is called a capture card. Technically, that's the capture card there. And it basically plugs, this is what I'm plugging in here is called an HDMI lead. I just need to give it so it can focus there. One step up from USB, it's got more connections and things. It's what if you've ever worked with an overhead projector, it's often what you use to plug one of those into a laptop. Now, the capture card and the HDMI lead basically enable you to take a standalone camera and plug it into a laptop. So you can plug the laptop, a camera into the laptop. What I'm going to try and do next, I mean, this could all go horribly wrong. I am still here, honest. It's going to around the other side of the room. There is a camera just out of shot, which you can't see, but I'm going to plug the lead into a camera like so. Right, so the next thing to do is I'm going to show you a different screen now, if I can. There we are, right. So we've got as far as plugging a camera into this laptop. That's fine. But what do we do next? Well, this basically is what we do. So here is a piece of software called OBS, which may or may not work for me. We will have to see. And what you can do is you can add a device to it. Yeah. And there we go. Right, you're looking now. Ta-da. So, okay. There we go. Right, so what you are looking at now, hopefully, is a teddy bear sitting on a bookshelf. Good stuff. I'm just checking I'm still with you because I'm doing several things at one go here. I'm going to backtrack a tiny bit now I've actually plumbed it all together with you watching. Okay, so the capture card enables us to plug the camera into my laptop. Fine. On my laptop now is what you're viewing on the screen, something called OBS. And OBS is a piece of software which basically takes the input of the camera and anything else you want to put in, and then sends it on to Facebook or to YouTube or wherever. So you'll see that you've now got the teddy bear sitting on the bookshelf on both sides. That's because the side, as you looked at, the left-hand side is a preview, and the right-hand side is what's going out to Facebook. So I would click Start Streaming down at the bottom here to send things onwards and outwards to the outside world. What you then have to do with Facebook is to, it gives you a code which you plumb into this piece of software. It links the two of them together, and on you go. The other thing you can do with this software, just so as you know, is to bring up on the preview window on the left-hand side, you'll see that the teddy bear now has words all over the top of his head, which we can then put live as well. This was my attempt 2 weekends ago to put the spiritual communion prayer on screen while the congregation were having communion. Basically, it didn't work in the sense that there's too many words there and the picture is fighting the words, the graphics. So I'm going to need to find a different way of doing those. And this, using the external camera, capture card, the OBS software you've just been looking at with the two windows and the teddy bear, and the live streaming key to link that all into Facebook. That was the rig I put together for last Sunday in St. Paul's, and assuming it all plays, this was the result. This is where you get to see my camera shake, by the way.
All glory, praise, and thanksgiving be unto thee, Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, creator and sustainer of all things, maker of man in thine own image, who gave us thine own...
There we go. Anyone who's ever worked in the Wrexham or Aberconwy areas of North Wales, that's former retired Archdeacon Bob Griffiths, who's currently covering an interregnum for us. A few things I still think about as learning points from there, one of which is that my own camera work in getting from Christina, the cantor, across to Bob was a little bit on the shaky side. It just shows how hard it is to tilt a camera which is sort of somewhere over towards your right, round to the other side without sort of shaking on the way. There's a bit of skill there, but it allows us to get much better picture quality, much better sound quality. The audience can connect with Bob because they can actually see his face a bit closer up, and particularly for something as intimate as the consecration, the fact that they've got an idea in the shot, they have all the things that they need to understand what's happening, see the communion vessels. By luck rather than by judgment, I had forgotten, of course, that when consecrating bread and wine, the priest raises them quite high up, and I managed to frame the shot in such a way that he just about managed to stay within the shot, because I don't want to mess around too much while we're live. So that was one of the small learning points which I shall take forward. You have to remember that as a singer in church choirs, I spend most of my time behind the priest rather than in front of them when the service is going on. So that was last Sunday. That's sort of where we are at the moment. There's still quite a bit of learning to do. I mean, I've got to find ways, if you like, of making the system that we've got more permanent. Even little things like the fact that the laptop, which I'm using to talk to you now, which is what we were live streaming from, needs power because its battery is rubbish, and I'm doing that from an extension lead, which is gaffer taped to the floor of the church. We need to put some power in at some point and things. So there's lots to be done to move things forward, but the system so far is just about working in a way that I'd want it to. I wanted to quickly finish, though, by saying that when it comes to talking about live streaming, it's certainly been a thing which lots of people have considered. I think there's still lots of potential for people to ask themselves the question to live stream or not, if you like, because I have to say that when we got into lockdown, I mentioned I did some experiments with live streaming at the start of lockdown. We actually stopped live streaming Sunday Eucharists at the start of lockdown and went into a video service instead. That was partly because we're in interregnum at the moment, and I didn't actually have a priest I could physically put in the church under the lockdown regulations, because the one who was doing it for us, John, was coming 20 miles from Abergele, but also because it's a case of trying to involve other people in the service as well. Before I mention that, in terms of the pros and cons of live streaming or not, the advantage, if you like, is that you're doing a service anyway. It's happening, and it gives you some content to put on Facebook or YouTube or wherever. It allows you to put a window up without actually having to do much more than get the text sorted and stick it out there. It does have the added advantage that those who can't physically get to church on the Sunday morning can look in on what's going on and see some familiar faces and things, even if it's just sort of readers, cantors, choir, whoever. Some downsides, if you like, is that connectivity is quite important. I mentioned, of course, that whoever uses the phone, if there's no sort of broadband or Wi-Fi or mobile Wi-Fi available in the church, they have to allow for a certain amount of their data to be burned up by putting this live, as people have found. There is at least one church in our patch, the next one up the road, where you just couldn't stream from because the mobile 3-4G signal there isn't good enough. And given that it's the former parish church before we became a mission area, then it gives us headaches over things like streaming sort of important mission area services and things. The other thing, I suppose, goes back to what I was just about to say, which was when it comes to involving other people. The reason that we went to a recorded video service at the start of lockdown rather than a live stream service was simply because I wanted to try and find ways of getting the congregation involved in the service more. And if you are in church, particularly during lockdown, you've got a priest by themselves, then there's not much scope for anything other than just us to sort of like try and broadcast outwards. Whereas if you can get people to film little video clips and things and send them in and edit them, you've got the ability to get them involved as well. Now, with that in mind, I'd say that for us now and in the future, live streaming is just one part of a portfolio, if you like, one part of a number of things we're doing. I just wanted to briefly show you something else we're doing, which took in mind that we had some feedback during the lockdown that basically if you've got children at home and they won't give you a moment's peace, then it's very hard to find an hour and 5, an hour and 10 minutes, whatever, to watch an entire live stream service or even a recorded communion service. We decided to put together something we call the 7-minute service, which is basically a pre-recorded thing. It isn't live in any way, shape or form. It's unashamedly edited, but it's quite short to allow us just to get participation from the congregation, and also to connect with our church school. This is what we're currently putting together, as well as live streaming. Right.
Welcome to St Paul's Church in Llandudno. This is the
7-minute
service.
Today we will be thinking about buried treasure. At our school Padarn, we have been making our own treasure and hiding it around the town.
That was what you were supposed to be seeing. I think the reason I showed you that is partly just to say, because in terms of getting stuff out there, then there are more ways, if you like, than doing live broadcasts of services. A good example would be St Asaph Cathedral along the way from us has never live streamed a service, and as far as I know doesn't intend to, but does do a video version of its Eucharist and has done since lockdown, and a second one in Welsh as well. And which it puts out on its own website as a presentation there. Quickly whiz forward towards the end. The final thing I wanted to mention is it's probably worth thinking when it comes to live streaming about the fact that you do end up with two congregations. One of which obviously is sat in the church, the other is watching, possibly not even watching, because I've had some sort of feedback over time that people often will just put the service on as sound broadcast in the background while they're making breakfast or whatever, and that's one reason why it's actually quite important to try and get the sound to be right. But it does sort of give you two or three, I suppose, considerations which is probably worth just having in the back of your mind. I'll throw them into the mix, if you like, now, as perhaps the things that you may want to ask questions about in a second. But communion is one issue which we've sort of agonised over a fair amount at St Paul's, because I regard sort of actually receiving the sacrament as quite an intimate thing between sort of you and God and not much else. And I always feel a bit uncomfortable at having people on screen while they're having communion. I mean, we took that to an extreme 2 weekends ago when I sort of focused in on the priest after the communion. He proceeded in full camera shot to stuff his face with the remaining hosts, and there wasn't much I could do about it, because if I'd panned off him, then it would have been very, very obvious. What I have got in the habit of trying to do, though, is during communion time is of tilting upwards and showing a shot of the east window instead. Or if the cantor is singing an anthem, of showing that instead. It's probably also worth just bearing in mind, I mentioned before about sort of people just listening to the service while they're having breakfast. I suppose it's even nominally possible that people would watch or listen to a live stream service on Sunday morning in bed or in the shower or something similar. Against that background, it's probably worth just sort of bearing in mind something that was said when I first started working in radio years and years ago, which is trying to talk to people almost individually, because I suspect an awful lot of the live stream audience are by themselves, because they're giving their attention to the live stream. If that's the case, then talking to an individual rather than saying hello everybody, then good morning, and talking to you almost in the first person is worth perhaps just thinking about. And then the other thing, ultimately, in a live stream or any broadcast, the only window you've got, if you like, the only means of communication you've got with your audience is basically is down the lens. So it is worth you while sort of trying your best to be able to sort of make sure that you're either making eye contact in some way, shape or form at various times, in a way that it's perhaps less of an issue in a church, than being able to sort of connect with people through the camera is worth just thinking about every now and then. I'll leave that there because I'm conscious of the fact we've reached the end of the time. So I'm going to, having actually managed to share, I'm going to stop the share like so. Yes, over to you, Anna.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. That was full of useful information, slightly mind-boggling at times, and it just goes to show that it's difficult to get everything perfect when you are going live. And I think, as everything, you learn with experience, and we learn as we go along. So thank you very much indeed. I hope you can stay for. We've got quite a lot of questions actually. There's quite a lot of interest here. So I'll start with one that you did touch on, and I think which is in a lot of people's minds, and it's from Alison Goldstein and also from Sister Marion here, looking really about people's permission for them to be filmed. You talked about how during communion you keep the camera off them, or you can set up the camera in places and tell people they can go to other places where they won't be filmed. But what do you recommend as good practice for telling people about the fact there are cameras there and where they can go if they don't want to be filmed?
I think right at the start of what we did at St Paul's back in 2016, I put things in the weekly newsletters some weeks before we actually did anything. You might see a camera start to appear around church soon. This is what we're going to be doing, sort of thing. We put a notice up in the porch saying basically that the services are streamed on social media, and if anyone has any further questions, if you like, they should ask the sides people on duty. And in terms of giving the sides people an answer, if you like, to be able to tell people, then that was the point at which we reached this idea of the left-hand side of the church. The communion rails weren't visible. In practice, whilst we've had the slightly posher camera, which I was alluding to at the end of the presentation, basically the only people who appear on screen are the celebrant, anyone doing the readings, anyone doing intercessions, and anyone doing singing. We're in a position where we can, I suppose, talk to them individually and if necessary. I mean, in practice, anyone who's a regular at the church knows what we do and hasn't raised any issues. It would, when we deal with the junior choir, I'm just sort of thinking that there are, I suppose, a greater level of issues when it comes to children. With the junior choir, the consent form to take part includes and we may film, and we may take pictures, and we may broadcast on social media, and we get parents to sign up to the whole lot, if you like. We have had, there's an example in a church locally to us where they had a child singing in the Sunday morning services with because the juniors and adults were together there, who had a social services connection in a family background, and that did start to become slightly problematic for them. But I think that there are ways around it. It's a case of making sure people are aware what's happening and can raise any issues. And in 4.5 years, I've yet to have anyone actually say that they don't want to be on camera, even though we provided a facility for people not to be seen.
Thank you, Chris. Another question here too about sound quality. And does the sound quality depend on the device you use? Asks Melissa Saunders. And also, Helen Dawson wonders, do you think it'd be worth investing in kit? You showed us some kits, and do you think it's worth investing it now with microphones, particularly with streaming looking more likely as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, sound is a bit of a sort of a personal thing of mine, partly because, and I started in broadcasting as a radio person and moved into pictures later on. But also because I think I'm aware, as I mentioned, that a number of people have a live stream on as a sound feed, almost you might call it like a podcast or a live broadcast or a radio broadcast or something similar. I'm conscious of the fact that sort of like, I mean, we don't have any money at St Paul's, and one has to be very careful about how much we spend. It is worth trying your best to get the sound right, or as right as you can. What I was trying to, I suppose, to demonstrate as best I could at the start of the presentation is that you can do some things by putting the phone or the camera in the best position you can. The other thing is, if the church has got a sound system already, it's probably worth trying to link it into the camera if you can. That's not always as easy as you might think, because I mean, our antiquated sound system in St Paul's, the output which the speakers want and which the hearing loop aerial wants, they want it considerably quieter than the camera wants it. So I've had to find a way of getting another sound output from there. I think a bit of kit which I didn't sort of particularly demonstrate, you can buy sort of microphones which plug into the bottom of mobile phones. That might be a halfway house. I don't have any experience of using them, which is why I sort of hesitated on them a little bit. But there are things which you can buy, which you can plug into phones direct. The other possibility, of course, being using the iRig, which I was showing before, and simply plugging a microphone into that might just give it a slightly better sound quality. The other thing which I'm not technically competent enough to advise on, there are different types of microphone, such that basically a microphone will only hear a certain amount of what's around it. Some microphones have like a sort of dog flea collar sphere around. They'll hear everything in this, in that cone, if you like. Some microphones, I think they're called condensers, are basically better for picking up lots of sound from around the wider building, but then only filtering out what they would regard as the important bits, if you like. I suppose that's a very long-winded way of saying it. It can get rather complicated. If anyone wants to sort of send me some emails or anything privately over the next few weeks, I'm happy to sort of continue the discussion and things. There comes a point where it might be worth trying to find someone with a bit of technical expertise as well, though, if I want I suppose to find the right type of microphone and the right type of kit.
Thanks, Chris. And I think like a lot of things, it's as you develop your experience, you realize what you need, and then you work out exactly what equipment is best for your needs. I've got another couple of questions about software. John Gillibrand asks, is there any practical and effective way of providing subtitles for a live act of worship?
Ooh, I think Facebook has the ability to do that. It has got something somewhere where it will sort of attempt to listen to what somebody's saying and to transcribe it onto screen. And I think that the OBS, as in those two screens that you saw with the teddy bear on it, that software has got something on it as well, although it's described as being in development. The reason I think that it exists in Facebook, if you know where to look, is because there's a priest called John Connell, Rumney, somewhere in South Wales, and I chanced upon one of his live broadcasts, and he had that on, and it was subtitling, although it was doing it in an interesting way. I mean, if you're going to use the 1984 prayer book, then who knows what it will make of some of the language in there. But it does exist. I think when it comes down to it, also is, I mean, the most accurate way of doing anything like that, I suspect, is to have an operator who can flash them up on screen, having prepared them in advance, because most of what is said in a service is prepared usually. So there we are. And Veronica has found Father John Connell, who does go live on Facebook quite a lot. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Marion Hughes wants to see if you've got any video editing software you recommend.
Gracious. For very basic things, as in literally just taking some clips and shoving them together, if you have either a Mac or an iPhone, then it has its own piece of software called iMovie, which I have used relatively well. I mean, it's a bit clunky and fiddly on screen, but it does the job. For editing things, I use something called Lightworks. it's mainly because it's relatively close to stuff I've used in the past. There are other things out there, but there's plenty of free software. It requires basically, I suppose, you to get your head around the basics of TV editing, which is that obviously only one picture can be on screen at one time, but you can have two audio tracks and they can be mixed together. It's probably worth, if you want to sort of get your head around video editing, depending on how much experience you've got of it, then sort of a bit of poking around YouTube to find tutorials, and also just doing a bit of Googling as to sort of like what sort of software might sort of suit what you need, whether it's basic or something more complicated.
Thanks, Chris. And we've also had some more advice from an anonymous attendee about captions on Facebook, giving us a bit of advice on that. I think, as you said, when you're doing it live, you do take a chance with captions on Facebook, but if you've got something recorded, it is quite easy to put up your captions.
Yeah, you can add them to live videos afterwards, actually. Well, I think on it's not something I've really sort of delved with, because I mean it would be an obvious thing to do in some ways, because it would help perhaps to unlock particularly a Eucharist to people watching, because you could give some insight as to sort of like why we sing certain things at certain points. I mean, even just like literally sort of Magnificat, Song of Mary sung every evensong, that sort of thing. It's those things are quite insightful to people who are outside, if you like, the family of regular worshippers.
I've also got a question about bandwidth here. I'm wondering if you use 4G, or does St. Paul's have good Wi-Fi?
At the moment, we're basically using whatever 4G is around. And Llandudno has got decent 4G, thankfully. Could be better, but it's all right. And the church being made of stone doesn't seem to stop it too much. 2 weekends ago, about 9:30 before our 9:45 service, I was frantically on the phone to my wife, because we have a family mobile contract between the two of us, asking her if she could gift me some more data, because I wouldn't have enough to get through the service. And she happens to be the one in charge of the family mobile contract. So I was just saying, I mean, we were tethering to my phone, which was quite warm by the end of the service, let's say. That's something we need to deal with. I mean, St. Paul's has never been a parish church, you see, so it's never had an office or a phone line, and getting proper Wi-Fi in would require, I suspect, BT to sort of like to dig the road up, which is not going to be cheap. So it's an issue for us. What we'll probably do as a halfway house is to buy a dongle. It's one of those things. It's like a mobile phone in terms of it uses the 4G network, but it will basically sort of create its own wireless hotspot, and because it's not a phone, it's not doing anything else like sorting out your emails, sorting out phone calls. It's just dealing with wireless, so it can be a little bit faster speed-wise. I'm working on the assumption that a communion service is probably taking about between 5 and 7 gig of data. I haven't quite got to the bottom of how much, but it's a fair amount, particularly if you're using a decent quality camera, which we have been recently.
And there's a question here, another question from John Gillibrand, who is a vicar himself, and I don't know whether this is a question for you or a question for clergy, but he wants to know, how do your clergy feel about preaching to a mixed live and virtual congregation, or to a virtual congregation only? Do they adapt their way of doing things in any way?
Well, we're in interregnum, so at the moment, our new vicar, as it happens, has been very good at live streaming in his own church, and he has done his way during lockdown, I think, was to put the sermon up as a separate pre-recorded broadcast, and then this was during lockdown when he didn't have a congregation with him, and then basically to get to the point where it would be and refer people to look at it if they wanted to, and he would also send the script out, I think. I haven't had a chance, because he hasn't joined us yet, to actually work out what his rationale behind that was. I suspect it's to allow him basically to keep people's attention. So for a communion service, you can make it just a tiny bit shorter when your audience is only online. I think it comes back down to sort of like this balancing the needs of an online audience and a live audience, because one thing I have found over the last 3 weekends, being actually physically in charge of the camera and the live stream, you do get in the top corner of the Facebook broadcast some statistics of who's watching, and they go down and up, and it's fairly obvious that people are dipping in and out in a way which they no way would if they were actually at the congregation in the church itself.
There's a question here too from Sister Marion, and she's asking about the copyright issue when it comes to music, which you have touched on.
Yeah.
She's looking at when you're taking services at home, are we covered by anything when using our home CDs of our own?
It's not something I had to, when it comes to home CDs, it's not something I had to deal with, because at the start of lockdown, one of the challenges that I had, along with my colleague director of music, was we had a choir who needed to keep singing. And so what we did was we only used music, and have only ever used music in video services, which we generated ourselves. So we get the organist to play things and send them to us. We also do what many people do of getting the choir to sing their individual part and then mixing them together, which it's a modest amount of work, but it allowed us to stay roughly within the sort of like the terms of the license of what we do, which we are obviously licensed for a choir to get together and sing things in the church. I mean, I'm aware that I never quite had the time or the need to give CCLI a call and work out where we stood as regards recorded music. I think we would have been covered, but there are various degrees of license. I mean, what I've always found with the copyright people is if you ring people up and simply ask or email, then they're usually quite happy to advise, simply because, of course, that's their job, and their job is to help you pay them money to get licensed. I mean, the licenses are not too onerous on us as a church. They're certainly not the most expensive thing that we pay. But yeah, it is worth sort of checking these things.
Yeah, and you mentioned the CCLI there. That's the Church Copyright License group. And luckily, we've got a whole webinar on issue questions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Questions coming up at the end. So for more information on that, please tune in. And I think it's on our last webinar, which will be devoted to more of the legal issues, and we'll have some expert advice on that. Another question here, Chris, is you mentioned a 7-minute service. Do you know if there are any churches that record open the book for their local junior schools to watch during assembly?
I'm not aware of anyone locally. My sort of sphere of connection with local schools is fairly limited, as in we have a close relationship with our church school, but I mean, I'm aware of the concept, but I'm not aware of anyone. And St Mary's Church in Conway have done open the book, but I don't know if they do it virtually. It's a bit of an emerging thing, because of course the schools themselves have been effectively on lockdown recently anyway, and I mean, a lot of what we do with our church school and have done during lockdown has actually been as much through the parents' Facebook group, getting the parents to get children to do drawings and things, as it has been actually through the classroom. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, it's just one of those things that I think has plenty of potential to be developed. I mean, I think one of the mantras, if you like, with all digital ministry is just do something, because I mean, like, the internet is one of these sort of big melting pots of stuff, and the worst thing you can do is not put anything into it.
Yeah. And we've got a comment here from Sean Smith that says, open the book of refused permission for recording.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's useful to have that on the record. Thank you.
Yeah, and also Simon Large tells us we are absolutely not covered to use commercial CDs. We can broadcast your own cover versions, choir singing and organ playing only. So thank you everyone for those comments.
As I say, the areas which I didn't need to know about, so that information is useful. Thank you.
Yeah, and as I said before, we'll have a lot more on that at the final webinar. Chris, thank you very much indeed. We've covered a lot of questions there, and I'm sure people will have more as we go along with the series, but we're going to come to an end today. Thank you again for giving us all your time today and for your expertise.
No problem at all.
We continue our webinar series on Friday at 11 o'clock in the morning, looking at digital ministry to children and young people. I hope you can join us then. We will be hearing stories from a few of the many who have risen to the challenge, as well as sharing some ideas and good practice and highlighting some of the best resources available. The webinar will be hosted by Mark Griffiths, Dean of Discipleship at St. Padarn's, and the contributors include Helen Franklin from Scripture Union Cymru, Hannah Bunting, the Children's Schools and Youth Worker at St. Mike's, Steve Locke, Associate Pastor at Gilgal Baptist Church in Porthcawl, and Matthew Walls, leader of Message Wales, who's got a particular ministry around the challenges of discipling young people through COVID. So please join in at 2 o'clock on Friday for us then. And apologies today if you've put a question in that we haven't had a chance to answer today. But we look forward to seeing you, and please sign up for the rest of the webinar series too. Thank you very much, and have a good week. Goodbye.